Hi, so today we're going to do Bash shell scripting part 3. If you haven't watched part 1 and 2, please do so before doing this, since we're continuing from that point. So in this video, we're going to look at advanced concepts in for loops. So we will be using runtime arguments to feed that for loop. We are going to feed command output. So the result from a command will go into the for loop. We'll look at how user can send input into the for loop. We will look at a file feeding the for loop, a validation of data, and adding up numbers, so doing some math inside a for loop. Then we'll go to while loops, and we'll look at how we can feed data from keyboard into the while loop and from a file. We'll also cover two other concepts, one concerning shift command, and then finally looking at compound if-then-else statements. In the previous video we had looked at simple if-then-else statements. Here we'll look at compound ones where we have if-then, else-if, and so on. Alright, so we'll do by example, learn by example again as before. So once again, I am logged into my Linux server, the Matrix server. And I have a whole bunch of templates already ready, which are basically the basic comments and the shebang line at the top of the script, and just so to save a little bit of time. And the comments will indicate what we're planning to do in each of those scripts. All right, so let us begin. So we're going to build each script based on what it's expected to do. So the first one I'm going to do is S16, and once again, just a reminder that I'm using the .sh as an extension only for my own convenience. Linux does not require an extension. All right, so we're in the VI editor, and escape I means I'm going to be able to insert any further lines that I want to. Alright, so in this script we want to feed 6 runtime arguments into a for loop. So we're going to use a for loop, and instead of hard coding values we're going to send it 6 different arguments. And in the loop we want to display each argument. Okay, so first of all we have to remember that our for loop construct is for and then some kind of a variable and then in, and then that's where we would either hard code values or pick values that have been passed by the user. So I'm going to go back here and I'm just going to call the variable I. You can call it anything. It can begin with either letters or underscores. And now, how do I capture 6 runtime arguments? If you remember from the previous video, we have runtime arguments are those that when you run the script, you pass a bunch of different arguments. And the first argument will be stored in $1. Second will be stored in $2, $3, $4, $5, and $6. So that's how we have captured 6 arguments that would be sent by the user. And we are putting that in the for loop so that each one of these will go into the variable I one at a time. And the construct of your for loop is a do and a done, and whatever lines we put inside is what's going to execute multiple times. So the only purpose for this for loop is to display each argument that we've captured. So we can just put an echo statement, and how do we echo the value that's contained in this variable? We use the $sign in front of it. So $I is all we need to echo the content. So whatever has been passed is going to be captured one at a time, stored in the variable, displayed. The next one goes in here, stored in the variable I, and then we're displaying it. So it'll keep going until it's picked the last one. And since there's nothing more beyond that, it's going to stop automatically. Alright, so let's save that. And it's already S16, it's already made executable by me, so that's why you see an X over here already. So I can run it. A reminder that in order to run the script, always good practice to go // so that it looks in the current directory. Otherwise, if that's missing from your path, it's not going to find it, even though it's right there. S16. So that's how I'm running the script. But now, if I'm passing parameters at runtime, then I need to type them right here. So it doesn't matter what I'm passing, because as you can see here, I'm not checking anything or validating anything. I'm simply grabbing what the user passed and displaying it. So it doesn't matter what I type in terms of sending the arguments. So I can do, 1, 2, 3, but I can also do numbers 4, 5, 6. It doesn't matter as long as there's 6 of those. And each one has to be separated by a space. So I've passed 6 parameters, and just to show you can mix and match anything, I've put 3 words and 3 numbers. So when I hit enter, you see how it actually shows all of them. So it picked one, showed that, picked the next one, and so on in that order. Let's go back here. So we were able to see each one of those in order, and all it was doing was displaying it. All right. Let's now look at a situation where we should be able to grab all the arguments, not necessarily a certain number of them. So instead of saying grab 6 arguments, we can say grab all arguments, whether it's 1, 2, 5, 10, however many arguments are passed. So let's go into the next one. And here, again, we're going to do a for loop. And again, I'm using the same construct as before, but instead of $1, $2, etc., if you remember from the previous video, how do we grab all of the arguments passed, regardless of how many? It's $@. So this will capture as many as the user has typed. Again, we have the do and the done, and inside the do and the done, we're simply still going to echo the content of this variable. So echo $I, and this will take each one in turn, display, second, display. So it'll keep going as many arguments as there are. Save it. It's already executable, so we're going to run it. And I'm going to again pass maybe just a couple of parameters, and it does those. If I pass many more, it's going to do all those. So the benefit of this script is that we're not limited by how many parameters we must pass. We can pass as many, as little as 1, as many as however many you want, and it'll grab all of those. Why? Because it's using the $@, which grabs all the parameters. Really nice. Okay. For the next script, so I'm going to go into S18. So in this one, we want to use the output from a command. So instead of parameters or arguments being passed by the user, we can use any command. In this example, I want to use the ls command. So the result from that output, in this case, the result from the ls command is what's going to be fed into the for loop. So you can see how powerful it can be. You can take any command and feed the result into the for loop. Really, really cool. So again, we're going to use the for loop. Now, any variable name, I'm going to call it file name, just because that's what I'm going to feed into it, so it's more meaningful. And then how do we pass the result of a command? We pass it by putting inside round brackets. So the command I want to use is ls, and then it says it should list all files starting with the letter F. So how do we do that? F and a star will pick all files that begin with the letter F. And in order to capture the output from this command, we have to put a $sign just outside the bracket. So we can put any command here as long as it's in the round bracket, and as long as we have a $sign immediately, no space here, just $sign immediately before the round bracket. with this construct, we can feed the result into this variable one at a time. So if there's 10 files that qualify, it'll keep putting one at a time into this variable. The rest of the construct is the same. We have the do and the done. So here we can put any command that we want. So I'm just going to echo here is a matching file. So, and then we wanted to display that file, right? So how do we display it? We can display it by displaying the value inside this variable. So again, to display a value inside a variable, we go $, followed by the variable name. And it doesn't matter what that variable name is, remember? We can say var1, we can say ABC, it doesn't matter, but putting a meaningful name always makes more sense. Since we're looking at list of files, I call this variable file name. All right, and of course we are using double quotes so that it can interpret any special characters here, so I'm going to have to close with a double quote as well. Everything goes between do and done. Even though I'm using only one line, it can be any number of lines here for the do and the done. That's it. Let's save it and let's run it. So in this case, we notice that we're not passing anything, right? In this code, we're not passing anything. It's simply going to look in the current directory and issue the command ls space f star, and any number of files it comes across, it's going to keep putting them here and displaying that name of the file. So let's see what it does. All right, so it showed us 2 files, because if I do ls, in my current directory, the only file names that begin with F are these 2 files. Everything else begins with usually an S or a T or an N. So the only 2 files, file 1 and file 2. So that's what it did. It's same as if I did this, right? If I do, whoops, sorry, ls and then f star, there we go. So if I did ls f star, I would get these 2 names. So those are the only 2 names that got fed in. That's the command. It picked up those 2 file names, it fed it into this, and it displayed it. So this is very powerful because you can take the output from any command. Really, really cool. The next one we're going to do is we've learned before about patterns, about grep and egrep. So let's go inside S19. What we're doing here is we're saying we're going to prompt the user and ask them to input a pattern for file names. In other words, if the user wants to look at file names beginning with the letter F, they would send F as the pattern. If they want to look at file names beginning with the letter A, they would send A as the file name. So this makes this script much more flexible because you're not stuck with looking only at files beginning with F, which is what happened in the previous script we did. Here, the pattern can be customized by the user. That's the beauty of this. And then we would take the input that the user is sending, take the pattern the user is sending, and that's what we need to build into our expression in that same ls command. That's what we're going to do. All right, so, and then we have to display the file name same as before. So it's very similar to what we did before, but it's much more flexible. So first of all, how do we prompt the user for giving us input of a starting pattern? Well, echo is the way that you've learned before. So we're going to do echo, and we'll say enter pattern for starting file names. All right, so that's going to prompt the user. Once we prompt the user, how do we take the input? We use the read command. So read, and whatever variable we put here will hold the pattern. I'm going to call it pattern. Okay, so now we build our for loop again. So for, and the variable name into which every file name will be held, I'm calling it variable file name in. And again, we have to use the $sign and the round brackets within which we're going to put the command. So ls, and now $pattern is how we will access the pattern that the user has input for us, because that's what's holding it. Okay, and following the pattern, we have to put a star so that if the user passed A, it's going to be A star. If the user passed F, it'll be F star, and so on. And within our do and our done, we're going to put the echo command. So here is the matching file name, and we're going to show the file name because that's held in the variable here, so dollar file name. Okay, let's save it, and when we run this, so we are not going to pass anything because we're not looking at $1, $2 to get the input. We are going to run it without any arguments. When the program runs, it's going to give a prompt. We are then going to enter the pattern, right? Okay. So now it says enter pattern for starting file names. I'm going to say F because I know I have some files beginning with F. So it shows us those two. If I run it again, it says enter the pattern. Now if I say T, I know I have a file beginning with T. So it will show me that file. If I run it again and I put S, there's a whole bunch of files beginning with S, so I'll see all of those listed here. So that's the beauty of capturing input, making it much more flexible. All right. Next, we are going to get into S20, where we are going to use the for loop to do a little bit of math. So here the goal is that use the for loop to capture and validate. So we're going to do some validation as well. So far we would just take the input, never validated it. So we're going to use a regular expression to validate that it's a number that the user is entering. And in this case, I'm just saying that user will enter a runtime argument. So $1, $2, etc. is what we're using. If the number is not valid, we have to give an error message. If it is valid, we're going to actually do the math and make it a total. So we'll keep adding the valid numbers to the total. At the end, we're going to display the total. So again, do one thing at a time. Do not get overwhelmed by a few different things being asked all together. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm just going to put a value of 0 into a variable called sum so that it begins with the 0. So this is just assigning 0 to this variable. Then in my for loop, I'm going to use a variable number in, and instead of using $1 and $2, etc., because I'm not saying they're entering 1 or 2 or 3 numbers, all the numbers that the user will enter, I want to get hold of them. So I'm going to use $@. That way, whatever numbers they enter, they will all get used. All right. Now between do and done, we have to do the math. So before we do that, the first thing we have to do is we have to validate them. So let's see how we're going to do that. Well, we know we can use egrep or grep with a regular expression to match a number, but we have to somehow also get the content of, if the user said 100, if that's the number, then that will be stored in this variable. So we need to send this variable into that grep. How do we do that? So far we've looked at grep in a file name, right? But we want to look at the value inside this variable. So how about if we do an echo and we do $number? Because that will take, if 100 was sitting in this, it will echo the number 100. We can then pipe that into the next command, and that next command can be an egrep in which we are going to define our regular expression for the pattern. So how do we say that it's only numbers we're looking for? Well, we can do it by saying the reverse. That would be an easy way. So remember, we can negate by putting the caret sign as the first character inside the square bracket. So if we negate this way, we're saying if it's anything other than a number. So if the user is entering anything where there's even one character is not a number, then this will become true. And if this becomes true, what should we do? We should now check if the previous condition is successful. In other words, if there was even one character in the number which was not a number, then this becomes true. So what do we do here? We say if, and we're going to check. How do we check the previous condition being true or not? But we do that by checking the return value. So dollar question mark is what's holding the return value. We're going to check if it's equal to 0, which would only be happening if this was successful. In other words, if it found something that's not a number, this is successful. That means this will be equal to the return value, will be equal to 0. If it is, then we're going to echo that whatever the user has entered is not valid. And this is what's holding the number that's not valid. So we need to display this content. So we're going to say dollar number, just to show it back to them, is not valid. Now, we also want to, so we've given the error message if it's not valid, but we also need to exit it saying. So just to explain to you how the exit works, I'm going to first of all not put the exits here, and then we'll come back and edit that to put the exit. So let's just close the if condition with the opposite of if, which is fee. All right, so we've closed that condition, and now, so this is happening. If this condition is true, it's going to say it's not valid. But what if it is only numbers that the user has entered? So this will be false. If it's false, it's going to go and continue here, and we're going to say echo you entered a number and show that number to the user. So I'm going to show the dollar number to the user. So it'll display to them. And then we also need to add it to a total, right? We have to keep adding it to a total. So if it's valid, oops, Y-O-U. All right, so we also want to make keep adding it into a total. So sum is the total variable that I'm using. And to do math, you have to use the 2 round brackets. Okay, so that's how you do math. So we want to take the existing sum and add the number value to that. That's the only thing we're doing in the math. Now to assign, so if it's 100, we're going to add it initially to 0, so the result will be 100, and we want to assign that to the total. How do you assign the result of a math operation to a variable? By putting a dollar sign here. So we're going to put a dollar sign. So that's how you construct a math operation. Dollar sign outside, 2 round brackets, and the mathematical expression inside. So the result will be stored here. So what this will do is the second number, let's say the second was 200. It's going to then take sum, which already has 100, and it'll add 200 to that. So now 300 will be stored here, and so on. And it'll only do that for valid numbers, because if it's not valid, it's going to go here and give this error message, right? But without an exit which would have stopped it, you'll see that it has a problem, because what it'll do is, even though it's not valid, because nothing is saying exit, it's going to actually continue here and keep doing these things. That's what the problem is. All right, so let's actually go ahead and add the exit. So we'll go back here, and after we give the error message, we want to make sure it stops, the script stops. Now the other thing is, we always put, good practice to put a return value when you do an exit, and that can be any non-zero value. And that's very helpful, particularly when you have many spaces and many places in which exit is being used. So it's sort of like an error code. So if you know that the return value is 1, that means this is where the problem happened. Down below, if you have another exit with 2, then you know that's where the problem occurred, and so on. All right, so all this is good, and we need to do one more thing, because at the end you have to display the total. So I'm going to echo the total is, and now I have to display the total because that's contained in the sum, so that's what I'm going to display here. All right, so if we're doing everything that was asked for here, so let's just make sure we save that, and then we run it. It's 20. Now in this case, because we're capturing the input through $@. That means we're expecting runtime arguments. So when we run the script, we have to put 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, a bunch of numbers. All right. So let's run it. And at this point, I'm just going to put 2 numbers for now. And you can see that it goes through and says you entered 100, you entered 200, and gave you the total. Let's walk through. How did that happen? Well, I've entered 2 parameters, so both of those got captured here. So first it took 100, put it in number. It echoed that number into this regular expression. The regular expression said, is there anything that's not a number in 100? Nope. So this is false. So if it's false, then it doesn't do this, it goes here. It goes here and says you entered a number, and then it takes that number, so 100, and adds it to 0, puts it here. So this now has 100, but it's not going to stop because I had a second number here. So it goes right back up, takes the second number, which is 200, puts it here. It puts 200, echoes that, and pipes it into egrep. Is there anything that's not a number? Nope. So again, this is false. It doesn't go here. It goes down. It says you entered a number 200. That's what I see here. Then it takes 200, adds it to 100, and now we have 300 in sum. But now there's nothing more for this to do, so it doesn't go back, it stops at this point. It doesn't do the loop again. When it stops, it continues if there's anything else below. There's one more line, so that line says total is $sum. So $sum has 300 at this point, so that's why we see total is 300. So this will work no matter how many arguments you enter, because we're capturing all those arguments with $@. So let me run that one more time with maybe 300. So we have 3 arguments, so now it adds all 3 of them and gives you the total. What if I add something which has something that's not a number? So it's going to keep working, the loop will keep going for these 3, but then when it comes to this one, it's going to have an error. There we go. So it shows the first, second, and third, but then it says it's not valid and it stops. So it never goes to the end and never shows you the total sum. What if we had ABC, let's say here, and then we had another number? So what this will do is it'll do the first one fine, but it'll stop as soon as it hits this one. So it only shows us 100. The moment it sees this one, it's going to say it's not valid and it'll stop. So it won't even do the next number, even though that was a good number there. And it doesn't have to be fully alphanumeric. I could have something like, 2A. That will have the same problem because it has to be a good number. It can't be 2 and something else, right? So this will cause the same problem. See, as soon as it hits a non-numeric value, that's when it has the problem, because what is it doing when it hits a non-numeric value? When it comes here, so in this case, when I typed 2A as one of the quote-unquote numbers, it sent 2A into the egrep. So it says, is there anything that's not a number? Yeah, A is not a number. So this becomes true. True means return value is 0. So in this condition, is the return value 0? Yes. So this becomes true, and it actually does this. So it gave me the error message that says number is not valid. And then it hit exit, which means it stopped. And it stopped with a return value of 1. It never went here. That's why you don't see the total at that point. All right? Okay. All right, so in the next script, we are going to go here, and we're doing some more validation, but in this case, we're going to actually allow for a plus or minus sign to be there before the number if the user wants to. So here the script is again using numeric comparison. we're going to prompt the user instead of taking input through arguments, through runtime arguments. We're going to again use regular expressions to validate the input. We're again checking the return value and then using if then else to give the appropriate message. So let's build that script. So first thing is we have to prompt the user to enter a number. And so we're just going to use the echo statement. Please enter a number. And when the user enters something, we're going to read it, put it into this variable. So once we have the information inside that variable, we can echo $num and send it into the egrep to validate using a regular expression. So in this case, because the user can have a plus or a minus sign, so let's say that at the beginning of the number that's been entered, so caret sign to anchor it to the beginning, we want to allow the user to have a plus or a minus. So we're going to give plus and minus as the two options for the first character. Remember, the square bracket represents one character and these are the options inside that character. But what if the user doesn't want to enter plus or minus? We're allowing that, right? It's optional. So how do we make this plus or minus optional? If you remember the regular expression lecture, we can put a question mark, which is going to make the previous character optional. Cool, right? So question mark will make this optional. So if it's there, it's okay. If it's not there, it's okay. All right, but then we must have a number. So 0 to 9 is what we're mandating here. We must have a number. But what if it's not just one number? What if it's 100? That means one number and then two more numbers. But since we're not saying it should only be 2 characters or 3 characters, we should allow as many numbers as the user wants to put. So it could be 1,000, it could be 1,000,000, whatever they want to put. So how do we make that happen? Remember from regular expressions, if we put a plus sign, the plus will allow one or more occurrences of the character that's just before that. So if we put a plus here, it's going to allow 1, or it's going to allow 4,530 or 1,200,000, whatever. So as long as it's a number, one or multiple numbers without any other character, without any other spaces. So this is a kind of a quick review of your regular expressions. And then we want to anchor it to the end, which means anchor it to the beginning, anchor it to the end. So the only things allowed are plus or minus in the beginning, which is optional, and then a number which can have one or more numbers. All right, so that's what the regular expression is going to be. And if this is true, so if the above was true, which we are going to check using the return value, so $question mark, if the return value was 0, then we are going to echo great, because the return value will only be 0 if it matches this pattern, if what we asked for is what has been entered by the user. So then we say, yep, that's good. Otherwise, so we have an else, we can say invalid, right? Because only numbers or plus and minus is allowed. And we can close our if statement. Let's save that. And when we run it, it says please enter a number. Let's say I enter 7. It says good, that's good. If I run it again, and let's say I enter plus 50, yep, that's good too, because we can enter plus or minus and the number can be as large as you want. So maybe I enter minus 567, yep, that's good too. When it has a problem is if we enter something that's not a number, so 200, but I have an A in there. Now that's not valid, right? So we see that it's working. Great. Now let's look at the next script. So for the next one, we're going to go into alphabetic validation. So it's the similar concept, but we're going to validate it against a regular expression that does alpha. All right. So in this case, again, we're we're echoing, let's say, enter first name. So the user has to enter the first name. We're going to read it, put it into a variable, and then we're going to echo what the user has entered and pipe it into an egrep. And the regular expression we're going to use will say, at the beginning, I want to have either lowercase or uppercase, and I want any number of occurrences of that. And then we anchor it to the end. Close this, and again, we're going to check for the return value. So if the return value is equal to 0, which means our previous command was successful, then we're going to echo great. Else we're going to echo invalid. And we're going to close our if statement. So when we run this, it says enter first name. If I say Praveen, it says, yep, great. But if I run it again, and this time I have something that's not even an upper or lowercase letter, then it says it's invalid. All right, great. So I hope you have a good idea now about how to use for loop in a variety of different ways. So let's see how we can use a while loop now. So we're going to go into S23. So while loop is just another way of looping, and in this while loop we're going to see how we can get the user to enter stuff on the keyboard, and we keep displaying what they're entering until they hit the word end. The moment they put end, we're going to stop. So the construct of the while loop is while, and then you inside the square bracket. Now you have to have a space right after the square bracket for this to work properly. We're going to have dollar input, which is whatever the user is entering. If it's not equal to end, then we're going to have a do and a done. Before we start this, we're going to prompt the user. So echo enter anything on the keyboard, and we're going to read that input. So now in the while loop, we're capturing the value that's sitting here, which is whatever the user has entered, so dollar input, and we're checking if that's not equal to end, because the user still wants to keep entering. So what do? If it's not equal to end, we're going to keep saying echo type more, and we're going to read what the user has entered again, and we're going to show it back to them. So you typed dollar input, and then it's done. So user enters something, you read it, see if it's called end. If not, if it's not equal to end, we say type more, user enters, we capture it, and we show it to them. So we keep doing this until the user says end, and that's when we stop. All right, so let's save that, and we're going to run it. Enter anything, so I'm going to say new, it says type more, old, and Praveen. So whatever I keep typing, if I say end, that's when it's going to stop. All right. Let's look at another way of using the while loop. So S24. And in this, the user should pass one argument. So user is going to pass a file name at runtime, so $1. Read that file name when it's passed, so we're going to use the $1. And in a while loop, we'll have to use an input redirection in order to feed the value. All right, and we're going to keep looping until there's no more lines to read through in the file. That's one way of reading from a file in a while loop. So the construct goes like this: while read, and whatever variable you put here, I'm going to call it one line, and then we have a do and a done. Inside the do, we're going to echo a line is, because what it's going to read one line at a time, it's going to put it inside this variable, so we're going to have to show the content of that variable. Now, how does the file get in here? We go to this, use input redirection, and put the file name. Now, since the file name is passed by the user, we're going to put a $1. So this is how you feed the file into the while loop. So whatever file name I pass, that's what it's going to keep reading until there's nothing more. So it puts one line, shows it, next line shows it, and so on. And then we have, that's how you create the while loop to read from a file. Let's save that. So I'm going to run it. And because it's a runtime parameter, we have to pass the file name. I'm going to pass it file1 because I know I have that file with some data. So let's see how it does. So you see how that was a file containing some user information, and it kept reading each file and saying a line is, and then showed that line is, and showed that line until there was no more lines to show. So how did it do that? Because we sent it the file name, file1, it reads that and puts first line here. It then displays that first line. From the file it reads the second line, puts it here, displays it, and so on. So it keeps going until there's no more lines to read. All right. And the last way we're going to look at how we can also do the same thing is 25. So we're going to do the same thing, but it's a different way. So instead of using the input redirection and a parameter passed by the user, we can still have the user send the file name as a runtime parameter, but we are going to use it in a cat. So we'll cat the file name, and then we'll pipe it into the while loop. So let's see how we do that. So we're going to go cat $1 because that's what user is passing. And then we have the while loop where we do the read. Again, we use one variable into which one line at a time will be read. And we're going to echo a line is, and we're going to show the content of the variable. We're going to then be done. So here, instead of having input redirection here, we're going to cat it. But what we're missing here is we must pipe it. So after we cat, we have to pipe it into this loop. Remember the pipe symbol from before? So this will display the file. This is piping each line one at a time into the while loop. Cool, right? Okay. So let us save this. And when I run it, I have to pass a file name. So I'm going to pass the same one, file1. And you see how it does exactly the same thing? So we've looked at two different ways in which to use the while loop. All right. And the last two examples we're going to do is S26. There is a command called shift, and what that command does is it actually shifts the arguments by 1. So let's see how we can use it. So we're going to pass several arguments at runtime. We're going to capture them. First, we're going to display all arguments that have been passed. Then we'll run the shift command, and then we'll display the arguments again to show you how it shifts everything by 1. So I'm just going to do an echo command, and I'm going to say before shift, just so we know we're displaying it before we shift anything. How do we display all the arguments? $@. And then I'm going to run the shift command, which is going to shift everything over. Then we're going to echo it again. I'm just going to say after shift. And how do we echo it again? We echo $@ again. So just because we ran shift, you'll notice how it shifts everything over by 1. And let's save it. And when I run it, I have to pass a whole bunch of numbers. So I'm going to pass 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So see how it says before shift? That's what it had. It had all these arguments that I passed, and then it ran the shift command, and then when we echo it again, it actually, the 1 disappears because it shifts everything over by 1. So 1 is gone, but we still have all the other arguments. If we run shift again, the 2 will disappear, and so on. So this demonstrates, hopefully, quite clearly to you what the shift command does. And you'll be using this in one of your assignments. And the last example I have is using the complex statement of if then else. So far we've done if then else, but what if we need to do it multiple times? So it's if then else, then else, then else, and finally else. If then else if, and then we keep going until we want to have an else at the end. So let's see how that is constructed. So we're going to prompt the user, ask them to enter a mark out of 100 for a course. We'll read that input, and we'll use a complex if-then-else statement or a compound if-then-else statement to do a numeric comparison and then give an appropriate grade. So the first statement, of course, will be echo, and we are going to say enter your marks. We're going to read the marks, and then we have our if statement. So if $marks is greater or equal to 90, then what happens? Then we're going to echo that the grade is A. Oh, sorry, A plus actually. But now instead of just saying else, we're going to say else if. And in Bash, else if is done this way. So it's kind of ELIF. It's kind of a shrunk else if. So else if, in other words, it's going to go here if the marks are not greater or equal to 90, it's going to go here. So we have to do another check now, right? How do we do this next check? We check by putting the condition here. So $marks greater or equal to 80. And if that's true, then we're going to echo A, because if it's between 80 and 90, it's an A grade. Else if, so ELIF, we check again, and this time we're going to check if the $marks is greater or equal to 75, then we are going to echo B plus. We'll do one more else if, and we're going to check if the marks are greater or equal to 70. Then echo your grade is B, and we're going to stop because we can keep going all the way, but just to make it short, I'm done. I don't want to do any more checks. So I can say else. So you keep going else if, else if, else if all the way, and the last option you will use else. So else, if it's anything below 70, we're just going to echo your grade is below B. So it's something less than B. And then we close our if statement. So if then else and else ifs, all of these as a compound if then else statement, and we can keep going and checking, and the last one is going to be an else. All right. So when I save this and I run it, now I have to, it's going to prompt me for marks. Let's say I say 50. So it's saying my grade is below 50 because it kept doing all these checks because it wasn't greater or equal to any of these, so it said your grade is below 80. However, if I run it again and if I enter a 90, then it says I have an A plus. If I run it and I enter 80, then it's going to say A, and so on. All right, so that's how the compound statement of if then else is created. Great. So that brings us to the end of this third part of the Bash shell scripting videos. Hope it's given you a good idea now about the power of Bash shell scripting that you can use. Alright, that's it for this video. See you in the next one. Take care. Bye bye.